Ever feel like you're weathering a storm even when the sun's out? For Florida, that feeling's, well, it's kind of baked into its very foundation. Hurricanes, right? They've been shaping this state for millennia, way before anyone even thought to give them names. You mentioned you were curious about this whole thing, the history of the hurricanes. So today, we're going to dive deep into Florida's hurricane story. Pull out those moments that really made a difference, those lessons learned the hard way.
And it's a story that goes way beyond just wind and rain, you know?
Yeah.
It's really about how people adapt and rebuild when they're up against this immense power. I mean, even before Europeans showed up, you had the Calusa and Seminole tribes dealing with these storms. No fancy technology or anything.
Welcome to Old Florida Now, where we uncover the rich history and hidden stories of the Sunshine State. Each episode will explore the people, places, and events that shaped Florida's past. Let's dive in.
Okay, so imagine this for a sec. You're living back then, right? No weather reports, no evacuation routes, no nothing. Just you, your community, and whatever wisdom, whatever knowledge has been passed down through the generations. The Calusa, now they were smart. They built their settlements on these raised mounds, almost like they knew they had to stay above the floods.
Exactly. They understood, like, the rhythm of nature, the way it worked.
Yeah, this
And it's
stuff.
something later settlers, they often didn't get it. Not until it was too late, at least. And this indigenous knowledge, it wasn't just a Florida thing either. You saw it across the world. All these native cultures, they figured out these amazing, really sophisticated ways of predicting and then preparing for these disasters.
Makes you think, huh? Like, who were the advanced ones, really? But anyway, let's fast forward a bit, few centuries. It's 1523. This Spanish explorer, Panfilo de Narvaez, he's about to learn the hard way just how unforgiving Florida's hurricanes can be. His whole fleet wrecked, scattered survivors all up and down the coast.
It just goes to show, even with decent equipment, a single storm could just wipe you out. And think about it, the ripple effects. Ships gone, supplies gone. Spain's plans for the whole colony.
Yeah.
Disrupted. Hurricanes, even back then, they had this huge impact, economic, even geopolitical consequences.
It wasn't just a local mess, it was like this shockwave that hit a whole empire. But that was just the start. Let's jump ahead to the 20th century. There's this hurricane that's basically part of Miami's DNA now, the 1926 Great Miami Hurricane. Over 370 lives lost, a whole city in ruins. But what's really interesting is how this storm, as bad as it was, it forced Miami to rethink, like, its whole relationship with hurricanes.
Oh, absolutely. Before 26, there was this feeling of, I don't know, maybe not invincibility, but definitely a lack of awareness. People just didn't grasp the true power of a major hurricane. But after,
Sir.
well, that naivete was gone, building codes got tougher, the Army Corps of Engineers stepped in to manage the flood control.
Sounds like the city got a crash course in hurricane preparedness.
You could say that, yeah. And you could draw a straight line from that devastation in 26 to the Miami we see today, a city that's, at least to some extent, built to withstand the fury of a major hurricane.
But then, just as Miami was figuring things out, boom, another hit. And this time, it wasn't even the wind that was the deadliest. The 1928 Okeechobee hurricane. It was only a Category 4 when it hit, but it exposed a different kind of weakness. Inland flooding. On a massive scale.
Lake Okeechobee, the banks overflowed. It was like a watery graveyard, claimed as many as 3,000 lives, most of them from communities that, were already struggling. And it was a wake-up call. This wasn't just about the storm itself. It was about the dangers of unchecked development, building around the lake without thinking, without a plan, the desperate need for real water management solutions.
So it's like every time they thought they'd learned their lesson, nature threw another curveball, showed them just how much more there was to learn. But hey, that's Florida, always adapting, always bouncing back.
Right. But nature wasn't done testing them just yet. Just a few years later, 1935, the Labor Day hurricane, that one slammed into the Keys with, oh man, record-breaking fury.
This wasn't just another storm, though, was it? It was like, what's the word, a benchmark? Like they started measuring all the other hurricanes against this one.
Yeah, you could say that. Winds, they estimated them at 185 miles an hour. And the storm surge, it completely reshaped the islands. Just brutal. A brutal display of, nature flexing its muscles, especially in a place as exposed as the Keys.
And this one, it wasn't content to just stick around, Hurricane Donna, 1960. It wasn't quite as strong when it hit land, but then it went on this rampage up the entire East Coast. Proof that what starts in Florida doesn't always stay put.
Donna was a wake-up call for a lot of folks. It showed just how connected those weather systems are, how one storm can have these ripple effects, these impacts that stretch for hundreds, even thousands of miles.
It wasn't just a Florida problem anymore. It's a whole region. Economies, communities, all caught in the crossfire. But hey, you can't talk Florida hurricanes without mentioning the one that still gives people nightmares, right? Hurricane Andrew, 1992, devastation, sure. But also how even when it seems like everything's gone, people find a way to put the pieces back together.
Andrew, that was a wake-up call, not just for Florida, but for the whole country, really. Those pictures, Homestead, Florida, just flattened. It's seared into our memories.
It's like Andrew made everyone recalibrate their understanding of what a hurricane could actually do.
Exactly. And yeah, the human cost was enormous. But, in a way, Andrew also pushed us forward. Hurricane forecasting, building design, disaster preparedness, all those things got better because of what happened. We learned from the wreckage, literally and figuratively.
But even with all the improvements, the hits kept on coming. Hurricane Irma in 2017, the price tag on that one, over $50 billion. And then Michael in 2018 just came in like a freight train, the most powerful storm to ever hit the Panhandle. It just makes you wonder, why Florida? Why is it always in the crosshairs?
Well, it's all about location, location, location. But in this case, it's more like geography and atmosphere. It's like this unique set of factors, all these things that have to come together just right.
So what's the recipe for a hurricane then? First ingredient, warm water, right?
Bingo. Florida's surrounded, practically swimming in it. The Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico, all that warm water. It's like a giant energy drink for hurricanes. Gives them the juice, the moisture, the heat, everything they need to grow and, become those monsters we see on the news.
So Florida's basically sitting on a meteorological hot stove.
Kinda, yeah. But it's more than just warm water. You see the shape of the peninsula, it's like a funnel. It guides those hurricanes right towards the coast. And then there's the Coriolis effect.
This is where it gets really wild. Explain it to me like I'm 5. What's the Coriolis effect?
Okay, imagine you're trying to roll a ball straight across one of those merry-go-rounds, the ones. While it's spinning, the ball's not going to go straight, right? It's going to curve. That's kind of what happens with the Earth spinning in the hurricanes. This Coriolis effect, it makes storms in the northern hemisphere curve to the right. Which, a lot of times, means they go from the Atlantic over towards the Caribbean and then whoosh, right up the East Coast, with Florida sitting right there in the middle.
So it's like a hurricane superhighway and Florida's stuck right in the middle of it.
Pretty much.
Okay.
And if that's not enough, there's also wind shear, or should I say, the lack of it. You see, Florida often has very low wind shear during hurricane season, which is not good.
Okay, time for a refresher. What is wind shear again, and why is it bad news when it's low?
All right, so wind shear, it's basically how much the wind changes as you go higher up. Imagine like layers of wind all stacked on top of each other.
Wow.
High wind shear would be like those layers all going different speeds, different directions. It can actually rip a hurricane apart, mess it up so it can't get organized. But low wind shear, that's when all the layers are moving pretty much the same way. And that lets the hurricane stay nice and tidy, get stronger, more organized.
So low wind shear is like giving a hurricane a free pass to cause chaos.
Pretty much. And wouldn't you know it, Florida's climate, its location, it's perfect for creating those conditions.
So it's like this perfect storm, literally.
Right.
Warm water, that peninsula shape, the Coriolis effect, low wind shear. All these things come together to make Florida a prime target.
That's the gist of it. A recipe for disaster, you could say.
And there's a specific time of year when Floridians are really on edge, right? Watching the tropics like hawks.
You bet. August and September, that's peak hurricane season in Florida. That's when all those ingredients I mentioned, they're just ripe for brewing up a storm.
So if you're thinking Disney World vacation, maybe not the best time to book it.
Something to keep in mind, for sure. But here's the thing about hurricanes. They don't always read the calendar. Yeah, August, September, that's when they're most active. But officially, hurricane season runs all the way from June 1st to November 30th.
So basically, you got to be ready all the time, right?
Being prepared year-round, that's just part of living in Florida.
It's not a suggestion. It's a way of life. But hey, before we get too bogged down in the doom and gloom, let's talk about some of the more, interesting stuff. Did you know those swirling behemoths, they can actually make tornadoes? It's true. Hurricanes making tornadoes is like they're not destructive enough on their own.
Right, like a little extra chaos for good measure.
Exactly. So how did that even work? I mean, a hurricane's already spinning. Why add tornadoes to the mix?
It's actually, it makes sense when you think about it. See, inside hurricane, you've got these thunderstorms,
Yeah.
and they're already rotating. But then, when the hurricane hits land, or even as it's getting close, all that friction from the land, the changes in the air, it creates this perfect environment for tornadoes to spin up.
Ah, so it's like the land itself is adding fuel to the fire.
You got it.
Yeah.
And remember Hurricane Andrew back in '92?
How could I forget?
Well, not only did it wreck everything in its path, but it spawned, get this, 62 tornadoes.
62. You're kidding.
Nope, 62 tornadoes. Imagine that. The force of a hurricane, plus all those twisters, each one carving out its own path of destruction. Just goes to show you how unpredictable, how much raw power these storms have.
Mind-blowing. But hey, speaking of hurricanes, ever wonder about the names? Who comes up with these things? Why do some of them sound like, I don't know, characters from a telenovela?
Uh-huh. It's a good question, and it actually has a pretty interesting history. Used to be way more random. Back in the day, they named hurricanes after, get this, the saint's day they happen to occur on.
So you could have, like, Hurricane St. Francis wreaking havoc on his own feast day.
Exactly. Not exactly respectful to the big guy upstairs, right?
Yeah. Not at all. So how do we get from saints' names to, Hurricane Agatha and Hurricane Bob?
Well, thankfully, someone realized that the saint naming system wasn't very practical. So in 1953, the National Weather Service, they decided to try using women's names for Atlantic hurricanes. Figured it'd be easier to less confusing.
So for a while, it was like a hurricanes-only club.
That's right, just the ladies. Then, in 1979, they added men's names to the mix. Equality for all.
About time. So how do they actually choose the names, though?
Well, nowadays, the World Meteorological Organization, they've got this whole system. They have 6 lists of names, and they rotate through them every 6 years. So like the names they use this year, 2024, they'll use those same names again in 2030.
Keeps things organized, makes it easier to keep track of all the chaos. But not all hurricane names are created equal, are they? Some of them, they stick with you. They become synonymous with just, I don't know, pure destruction.
Yeah, sadly that's true. And that's why sometimes they retire a name. When a hurricane is particularly bad, causes a lot of damage, loss of life, they retire the name out of respect for the victims. And also to avoid any confusion down the line.
Like Andrew, Irma, Katrina, those names are etched in our memories for all the wrong reasons.
Right, they become these reminders of just how powerful nature can be.
And speaking of powerful forces, we can't forget about the folks who are tracking these storms, forecasting, trying to keep everyone safe. The scientists and meteorologists at the National Hurricane Center, those folks are the real MVPs.
Absolutely. They're like those detectives on TV, always piecing together clues. Except their clues are weather patterns, satellite images, all those computer models.
The technology they have now is incredible. But as good as it is, we've got to remember, nature.
Always. We can try to predict what a hurricane's going to do, but there's always that element of, the unknown. They're complex systems, always changing. So, yeah, the technology's great, but it's really about heeding the warnings, staying informed, and having a plan. That's what makes the difference.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Florida's hurricane history, what are some key takeaways? What have we learned from this wild ride through the storms?
Well, for me, it really boils down to this. Respect for nature is crucial, but so is recognizing our own resilience. Florida's history with hurricanes, it's really a testament to the human spirit, how we adapt, we learn, we rebuild, even when it seems impossible.
We can't control the weather, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But we can control how we prepare for it, how we respond when the worst happens. And that's something we can apply to, pretty much anything life throws at us.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power. After all, the more we understand about hurricanes, the better prepared we'll be. Not just in Florida, but everywhere.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And hey, listeners, we hope this deep dive has inspired you to learn a little more about hurricanes. Whether you live on the coast or, smack dab in the middle of the country understanding these storms, it's the first step to building a more resilient future for everyone. So until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.
Thanks for listening to Old Florida Now. Stay tuned for more stories from the Sunshine State's past. Until next time.